In graph 20.3, we saw that it's possible for a country to impose a tariff on imports and export part of the burden of paying the tariff to the other country. In this graph here, we'll show that ability to export part of the tax burden disappears as the supply curve in the other country becomes perfectly elastic. If the importing country is relatively small, it becomes a price taker in the world. That is to say, no matter how much it demands, it's not going to be able to change the world price. Thus, in the case of a small importing country, it's reasonable to assume that the exporting country has a perfectly elastic supply curve. In our example here, New York is the importing country, and we're assuming it's small relative to Florida. The perfectly elastic supply curve in Florida implies that the world price, P star, is going to always be at the level of that perfectly elastic supply curve. This is true even if New York will import most of what's consumed in New York, because again we're assuming that New York is relatively small and therefore a price taker in the world market. The imposition of a tariff by New York will cause importers to lower their supply and thus cause price in New York to increase and the quantity for imports to fall. Since New York is small, the entire tariff will be paid within New York. In other words, the price will rise in New York by the amount of the per unit tariff T. Surplus in Florida is therefore unchanged because price is unchanged. Both before and after the tariff, the surplus is area A. Prior to the imposition of the tariff, consumer surplus was the area below the demand curve down to the green price P star, the area B plus C plus E plus F plus G plus H. Producer surplus was the area above the supply curve up to the green price P star, or area D. The sum of the lettered areas is therefore the total surplus prior to the imposition of the tariff. After the imposition of the tariff, consumer surplus in New York decreases to just the area B plus E. Producer surplus in New York increases from the initial area D to the new area C plus D. And the tax revenue that New York collects is the vertical distance T times the horizontal distance of the imports after the tariff is imposed, which is equal to area G. Overall surplus in New York therefore shrinks from the sum of all the lettered areas in panel B to the area B plus E plus C plus D plus G, leaving us with a loss of F plus H. The change in surplus in New York from the imposition of the tariff is therefore now unambiguously negative. New York loses F plus H as a result of the tariff. This differs from our conclusion in graph 20.3, where we had a scenario where New York was able to export part of the burden of paying the tariff to the exporting region. We took away that ability on the part of New York by making the exporting region's supply curve perfectly elastic. Thus we can come to the general conclusion that the more elastic the exporting region's supply curve, the less likely it is that the importing region can benefit in terms of a gain in overall surplus by imposing a tariff. Put differently, the smaller the importing region, the less likely it is that it can impose a tariff and increase surplus within that region.